He saved England at 14, then destroyed it. The tragedy of Richard II, June 14, 1381. London. Tens of thousands of armed men surrounded the city. They had already stormed the Tower of London. They dragged the Archbishop of Canterbury out of his chapel, the king's own chancellor, the man whose name was on the poll tax orders. They took him to Tower Hill, and it took 8 blows of a sword to take off his head. Then they put it on a pole and marched it through the streets. The king's advisors locked the doors. "Do not go outside. You will die." The king was 14 years old. He went outside anyway. To understand what happened, you need to understand the world Richard was born into. The Black Death had killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of England's population. Entire villages gone, fields unplowed for years. The labor shortage that followed cracked the feudal system open. Peasants suddenly had leverage. They could demand wages. They could walk away. The ruling class responded by freezing wages and passing laws to keep peasants in their place. Then came the poll tax, first in 1377, again in 1379, a third time in 1381, a flat rate, every person in England, rich or poor, paying the same. That was the spark. Richard himself was born in 1367. His father was Edward the Black Prince, the greatest knight in England, never lost a battle in 30 years. Dead by the time Richard was 10. His grandfather, Edward III, one of England's most celebrated kings, also dead. Richard became king at age 10, and the men around him, his uncles, his great lords, had no intention of letting a child tell them what to do. The crown was on his head. The power was in their hands. For a decade, he watched, and he waited. In early June 1381, 2 armies converged on London. From Kent came Wat Tyler, a roofer by trade, possibly a soldier once, organized and utterly furious. From Essex came another column under Jack Straw. Together, somewhere between 10 and 30,000 men. When they reached London Bridge, someone opened the gates from the inside. London's own poor opened the doors. They were not random rioters. They had a list. The Savoy Palace, the most magnificent private residence in England, belonging to John of Gaunt, the king's uncle, was destroyed in hours. The rebels smashed every piece of silverware, crushed the gemstones so no one could pocket them, and burned the records. One man was caught stealing a silver cup. He was thrown into the flames, with the cup still in his hand. They opened every prison. They burned every document that proved a man was not free, and then they went to the Tower. The Tower of London had never fallen before. Not to any army. Not to any siege. The gates opened from the inside. They dragged out Simon Sudbury, Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Chancellor of England. He had tried to pray. He had tried to escape by river barge the day before, but had been turned back. He knew what was coming. It took 8 blows of a sword to take off his head. His skull still exists, kept in a wooden box in a church in Suffolk, the town where he was born. You can still see every axe mark. They took the Lord Treasurer next, then the tax commissioner who had personally designed the poll tax. All 3 heads went on poles. The poles went on London Bridge. Richard was inside the Tower when this happened. He was 14 years old. That same morning, Richard rode out. No army, a small group of advisors, horses. He met the rebels at Mile End, an open field east of the city. Thousands of armed men, having just watched their leaders take off the Archbishop's head. Richard listened. The demands, an end to serfdom, free trading rights, land rents capped, the heads of the remaining traders. Richard agreed to almost everything. Royal charters granting every serf in England their freedom, the poll tax abolished, land reform promised. The crowd cheered. Thousands took their charters and began the walk home. But Wat Tyler had not moved. The next day, June 15th, Smithfield. Smithfield was the open market just outside London's walls where cattle were brought for slaughter. It smelled of blood and straw. Richard rode out again. Wat Tyler came forward alone on horseback to meet him. What was said is disputed. What happened next is not. William Walworth, the Lord Mayor of London, riding beside Richard, drew a dagger. He stabbed Wat Tyler. Tyler slumped from his horse. His men saw him fall. 30,000 people raised their weapons. Every advisor around Richard froze. This was it. The king was about to die in a field, and England was about to burn. Then Richard spurred his horse. Alone, he rode forward toward the rebel army, not away from it, and he raised his hand. "You shall have no captain but me." There was silence. Then he kept talking. He told them their leader was dead, but their cause was not. He kept moving, drawing them north and away from the city gates. It took less than an hour. By the time the rebels understood they had been walked away from London, the city militia had assembled behind them. The revolt was over. A 14-year-old boy had done what no army could. For a moment, just a moment, it really looked like England had found its greatest king. 3 days later, Richard revoked every promise, every charter canceled, every concession void. The legal reasoning, the promises had been made under duress and were not binding. He sent word back to the villages. "Villains you are, and villains you shall remain." 4,000 soldiers fanned out across England. They came to each village with the same offer. "Name the men who led you here, and you'll be spared." In Kent alone, at least 1,500 people went to the gallows. Across England, the total ran into thousands. The revolt was over. Serfdom continued. The poll tax was quietly dropped. England remembered Smithfield. England also remembered what came 3 days later. For the next 16 years, Richard waited. A group of powerful lords, the Lords Appellant, led by Richard's own uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, seized control of the government. They reversed his decisions, humiliated his advisors, executed his favorites. In 1386, they threatened to depose him outright if he didn't comply. Richard was 19. He complied. He regained some control by 1389, but he never forgot. He spent the next decade watching, building, quietly raising 2,000 personal archers in Cheshire, men who wore his badge and answered only to him. He also found something unexpected. His wife, Anne of Bohemia, arrived in 1382. She was 16. He was 15. By every account, it was genuine. She softened him. She reached people he couldn't reach. In 1394, Anne died of plague. She was 27. Those who knew Richard said he was never the same. In the summer of 1397, Richard moved. He had waited 16 years. He invited the Duke of Gloucester to dinner. Gloucester arrived. He was arrested at the table, shipped to Calais, and died in custody. An official inquiry concluded he had been smothered. Richard summoned Parliament and had his enemies impeached. Then he forced every baron in England to sign blank documents, charters with no content, which Richard could fill in later with whatever accusation he chose. Sign, and you handed him a weapon. Refuse, and you were the enemy. He was no longer governing. He was collecting leverage. But real power isn't built on fear alone. It's built on the belief that the powerful will protect those who submit to them. Richard broke that in 1399. Henry Bolingbroke, Richard's own cousin, heir to the vast Lancaster estates, had been exiled to France in 1398 after a quarrel with another lord that Richard used as an excuse to remove them both. When his father John of Gaunt died 6 months later, the entire Lancaster inheritance should have passed to him. Richard seized it all. Every estate, every title, everything, every baron in England received the same message. Your wealth is not yours. The king takes what he wants. Richard then left for Ireland to put down a rebellion. He turned his back on England entirely. It was the last mistake he ever made. Henry Bolingbroke landed in Yorkshire in July 1399 with roughly 300 men. He said he had come only to reclaim his inheritance. Within 2 weeks, most of England's major barons had joined him. Richard's commanders defected. His nobles switched sides. The 2,000 Cheshire archers, the private army he had spent years building, were gone. His Welsh allies melted away before a single significant battle was fought. England had decided, not with a revolution, not with a massacre, with a shrug. Richard returned from Ireland to find he had nothing. He retreated to Conway Castle in Wales, hoping something would change. Nothing changed. Bolingbroke's terms were simple: abdicate or face trial for tyranny. On September 29, 1399, 22 years after he was crowned at age 10, Richard II signed the document. He wept. He was 32 years old. Henry Bolingbroke became Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned at Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. As long as he was alive, he was a problem, a symbol, a reason for rebellion. In January 1400, a group of lords tried to restore him. The revolt failed within days. After that, the historical record goes quiet. The official account: Richard starved himself to death in February 1400 at 33. But when his body was examined, his skull showed signs of trauma. A fracture, consistent with a blow. Henry IV needed everyone to know Richard was dead. The body was publicly displayed, but carefully. Only the face was shown. Rumors spread immediately. He had escaped to Scotland. He was alive, waiting. For years after, men claiming to be Richard appeared across England and Scotland. Henry IV spent his entire reign haunted by the possibility. The boy who faced 30,000 rebels without flinching, found dead in a prison cell, or perhaps not dead at all, at 33. Nobody knows for certain, and that uncertainty is its own kind of verdict. The deposition of Richard II did not end anything. It started everything. The competing claims between the House of Lancaster, Bolingbroke's line, and the House of York, another branch of the Plantagenet family, exploded over the following decades into the Wars of the Roses. 80 years of intermittent civil war, thousands dead, multiple kings deposed or murdered, England torn apart. All of it traced back to one decision, in one room, in September 1399. Richard himself left other things behind. Westminster Hall, the Great Hall of the Palace of Westminster, still standing today, still used by the British Parliament, was rebuilt under his direction. He was a patron of Geoffrey Chaucer. He is credited, improbably but apparently accurately, with inventing the handkerchief. He was interested in food, in art, in ceremony, in the idea of what a king should be. Everything he did was shaped by one belief: the divine right of kings, the sacred nature of the crown, the absolute duty of subjects to obey. He was, in other words, a man who had very strong ideas about being a king. He just couldn't hold on to the crown. The boy who rode alone into 30,000 armed rebels, the boy who talked them down with nothing but his voice and his nerve, became a king who ruled by fear, exiled his own cousin, seized an inheritance that was never his to take, and handed the throne to the man he had wronged. The courage was always real. He just never figured out what to do with it. Once the crisis was over,